The chamber of the Galactic Council gleamed with gold and crystal, a monument to peace that was meant to end 1,000 years of bloodshed. Every race of the known galaxy was present, from the scaled monarchs of the Dravik to the luminous forms of the Alari, all gathered under one oath, to build unity through strength, and at the heart of it all humanity stood proud, their ambassador draped in the dark blue of Earth's diplomatic corps, his voice steady, his words measured. Today we close the chapter of war. Today, we promise that the stars will never burn for greed again. His speech drew applause. Even the council speaker smiled. But beneath that smile hid a secret. A silence that carried the weight of betrayal. For years, whispers had filled the council halls, whispers that humanity had grown too strong, that Earth scientists had gone too far, that the humans who built peace might one day destroy it, and when the treaties were ready to sign, those whispers turned to action. The peace ceremony was broadcast across 1,000 systems, light shimmering through the great domed hall of Valira Prime. As ambassadors stood ready to ink their names into history, the crowd roared as the human envoy raised his hand in salute, and in that same second, the stars above Earth began to burn. Without warning, Terran defense satellites exploded one by one, orbital stations went dark, and the fleet that guarded the homeworld was ambushed in orbit by ships marked with the insignia of the very council they had helped create. In a matter of hours, what was supposed to be the dawn of unity became the night of annihilation. In the council hall, as the peace ceremony continued, the human ambassador's communicator buzzed once, faintly, before cutting off completely. His smile faded, confusion flickered across his face. He looked up at the speaker. "What have you done?" The speaker did not answer, but the glow of the holoscreens behind him revealed everything. Images of Terran colonies burning, human cities under bombardment, children being loaded into evacuation shuttles that never made it past the atmosphere. The council chamber fell silent as he whispered, "This isn't peace." And before anyone could stop him, the council guards raised their weapons. The ambassador took a breath, calm, almost resigned. "You've made a mistake you will never forget." His voice echoed through the hall, and then they shot him where he stood. On Earth, chaos reigned. The skies were filled with light, not of celebration but of fire. The orbital platforms that protected the planet were shattered, falling like meteors into the oceans below. The Terran Defense Command issued desperate orders. All civilian ships, evacuate to Mars stations. Repeat, all citizens evacuate. But it was too late. The Council fleets had surrounded the system, cutting off every escape route, from the Arctic to the deserts of Australia. Every continent trembled. As plasma fire rained from orbit, humanity fought back with everything it had: rail cannons, planetary shields, nuclear missiles. But the sheer scale of betrayal crushed even their resolve. They were fighting enemies who knew every Terran defense code, every strategic weakness, because those codes had been given to the Council under the banner of trust. In the final hours of the attack, Earth's skies glowed like dawn, not from sunlight, but from burning ships entering the atmosphere. People ran through the streets as the ground split and the sky cracked with thunder. Inside the old Terran command dome beneath the Pacific Ocean, Director Elias Hale stood before the last active screen, his voice shaking but still defiant. "They've taken the colonies, sir. Luna base is gone," said his officer. "And the orbital fleet? Destroyed?" Came the answer. Silence filled the room until Hale finally said, "Then record this." The officer hesitated. "Sir." "Record this transmission," Hale said again, his eyes cold. "To the Galactic Council, to every empire, every species that raised a weapon today, listen closely. You've made a mistake you will never forget." His words were calm, quiet, and final. Then he pressed the command that sent the message to every frequency in known space. Moments later, a blinding white pulse erupted from Earth's orbit as the final failsafe was triggered. It wasn't a weapon, not exactly. It was a blackout signal, an electromagnetic surge so powerful it crippled every ship in range. Hundreds of Council vessels went dark. Their systems dead, drifting powerless through space. Earth had fallen. But it did not fall quietly. For days afterward, the stars near Sol flickered with strange energy readings. Then everything went silent. The Council called it the cleansing, a necessary act for the preservation of peace. They held new meetings, wrote new laws, and scrubbed every record of humanity's contributions from their archives. They labeled the Terran species as extinct, a casualty of its own aggression, and they moved on. But not everyone forgot. A century passed, and humanity became myth. Their names spoken in classrooms as a warning, in taverns as a ghost story. Don't cross the council, they would say, or you'll end up like the Terrans. But in the forgotten corners of the galaxy, beyond the reach of law and light, there were whispers, ships vanishing in the dark, signals repeating old Terran languages, worlds suddenly liberated from council control without a single shot fired. Traders spoke of shadows in the void, of engines that made no sound, and the faint pulse of an old frequency, the same one that had carried Hale's final words. On the council's capital world, Ambassador Saran, a young historian assigned to study the ancient wars, discovered a forbidden file buried deep within the archives. It was a voice recording, faint and corrupted, but when he played it, the words were unmistakable. "You've made a mistake you will never forget." The file timestamp was 112 years old. Saran frowned. "Why hasn't this been erased?" The archivist, an older alien with nervous eyes, whispered, "Because they couldn't." Saran leaned closer. "What do you mean?" The old alien swallowed. "Because the source keeps updating itself. Every 50 years. That night, Saran sat alone in his study, staring at the file, wondering if it was a glitch until he noticed something. The frequency embedded in the message wasn't static, it was alive, adapting, pulsing. As if it were listening, he whispered to himself, "What if they survived?" And as he said it, the room lights flickered once, the hologram dimmed, and across his desk screen appeared one new line of text. "We remember." He froze, heart pounding, his voice shaking as he whispered, "Who are you?" The reply came instantly, 3 words that turned his blood cold. "We never left." Far from the council's reach, in the dark edge of a nebula, something vast stirred. A fleet buried beneath ice and time, its engines silent for generations, its hulls black as night, each ship marked with a single white spiral glowing faintly across the void. And deep within the largest of them, the Eidolon, a woman opened her eyes, her voice calm but filled with fire. "Status report." A machine voice replied, "Systems at 92%, outer colonies synchronized, target, Valira Prime." She stood slowly, her steps echoing through the metal halls. "It's been 100 years since they burned our world," she said softly. "Let's remind them what fire feels like." Back in the council chamber, the speaker slept soundly, believing humanity long dead, believing peace eternal. But above his world, hidden just beyond sensor range, something moved, silent, cold, and waiting, as the forgotten words echoed across the void once more. "You've made a mistake you will never forget." And this time, the galaxy was about to learn what those words truly meant. The galaxy had long forgotten the fire that once came from Earth. Generations were born under the illusion that humanity was nothing more than a myth. A story whispered to frighten young cadets in the academy halls of the Galactic Council. The official records called the event the Human Purge, a necessary measure against a dangerous and unpredictable race. And every history book spoke of Earth as a graveyard, its oceans boiled, its skies blackened, its cities buried in glass. No one questioned the story anymore. No one dared, until the stars themselves began to whisper. It started small. Quiet signals hidden in the static of deep space communications, fragments of Terran language, coordinates that pointed to places long abandoned, cargo fleets that vanished without distress calls. And then, reports of entire patrols disappearing into dark sectors, their last transmissions garbled by interference, all ending with the same phrase, "We are not alone." In the archives of Valira Prime, the historian Saran sat alone before his console, surrounded by thousands of years of records, his tired eyes scanning the old texts of the Terran era, ever since he discovered the forbidden message, the one that shouldn't exist. He had become obsessed, he couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. The words haunted him, "We remember, we never left." He had reported it to the Council Intelligence Division, but they dismissed him with a cold laugh. "A malfunction," they said. "The ghosts of your data." Yet deep down, Saran knew better because the signal hadn't stopped. It was growing stronger, more precise, more alive. Sometimes, when the night was too still, he swore he could hear the faint hum of it under his skin, like a heartbeat in the stars. On the other side of the galaxy, beyond the trade lanes and border systems, A fleet lay hidden inside a dead nebula, a place where light itself bent and sensors failed. There, the last children of Earth had built their home in the dark, ships the size of mountains, black as the void, forged in silence and time. The Eidolon, their flagship, pulsed softly with power, its hull covered in old battle scars, its name carved in steel like a prayer. Inside, the crew moved like shadows, disciplined, silent, each one born after the fall, each one carrying the memory of Earth in their DNA and the rage of centuries in their hearts. At the center of it all stood Admiral Rhea Dalton, her uniform plain, her eyes cold and unblinking as she watched the galaxy's map rotating before her. The red markers showing Council-controlled systems pulsed faintly. "They've forgotten us," she said, her voice calm but sharp like ice. "Good." Her second-in-command, Commander Voss, stepped forward, his tone hesitant. "Ma'am, our scouts report movement along the Valira corridor. The Council's expanding again, pushing into what used to be Terran space." Rhea's expression didn't change. "They think it's empty, they think we're dust, but dust can choke a god if it breathes at the right moment." She turned to him. "Deploy the Watchers, tell them to listen, not strike. Not yet. When the time comes, I want them to see us coming, and I want them to know they earned it." Voss nodded. "And the colonies?" Rhea's gaze softened for a heartbeat. "Send aid quietly. Repair their systems. Erase our signatures. They will think the stars saved them." She paused. "It's better that way." Back on Valira Prime, the Council met in emergency session. The speaker slammed his fist on the table. 3 patrol fleets gone. Not a trace. Not even wreckage. Who is doing this? The room erupted with voices. The Dravik admiral hissed. "Pirates? Scavengers?" Another shouted. "No. These are surgical strikes. Someone is dismantling our outer defenses without firing a shot." The speaker turned to Intelligence Chief Aren. "You're the expert. Tell me, who has the power to erase ships from existence?" Aren hesitated, his hands shaking slightly. "There are rumors," he said softly. "The signal we've been detecting, it matches ancient Terran frequencies." The room fell into stunned silence until one delegate scoffed. "That's impossible. The Terrans were wiped out a century ago." Aren looked up, his face pale. "Then tell me, why does the signal keep coming from the same coordinates? The Sol system?" That night, Saran received a visitor at his home, an old woman wearing a dark cloak and carrying an outdated data core. She looked at him with tired, desperate eyes. "You're the historian who listens to ghosts," she said quietly. "And I have one for you?" Saran frowned. "Who are you?" "A survivor," she whispered, placing the core on his desk. "My grandmother was on a mining ship near the Terran frontier. The day her scanners picked up something, she activated the core, and the room filled with light. The recording flickered to life, showing the outline of a colossal vessel, black and glowing faintly blue, moving through the dark at impossible speed, and then a voice, human, calm, female, cut through the static. "This is Sol Command. You have entered restricted space. Power. Down your engines." Before Saran could speak, the image cut to black. The old woman looked at him, her eyes full of fear. "That ship wasn't supposed to exist," she whispered. "But I saw it with my own eyes, and it saw us." In the dark nebula, Rhea stood before the main viewport of the Eidolon, her fleet reflected in the glass. "Reports?" she asked. Voss approached. "Council surveillance probes have detected fragments of our movement. They've started investigating." Rhea smiled faintly. "Let them. Curiosity is the first step toward regret." She turned to her officers. "They think we're vengeful ghosts, but we're not here for revenge. We're here for justice, for truth." She paused. "But make no mistake, if they force our hand, we'll give them the storm they asked for." Days later, in the council chamber, alarms blared, screens flashing red. "Incoming signal," shouted a technician. "Unknown origin, broadcasting on every frequency." The speaker rose, his voice trembling. "Patch it through." The lights dimmed, and the council's great hollow display flickered to life, showing only darkness at first. Then slowly, a single symbol appeared. A white spiral turning on a black background. The room fell silent. The speaker's voice cracked. What is that?" Lauren's successor, the archivist, whispered. "It's the mark of Sol. Before anyone could speak again, a voice filled the hall, clear, calm, and undeniably human. "This is Terran Command," it said. "You called us dangerous, you called us extinct, you called us forgotten, we called you wrong." And then the message ended, leaving only silence. Panic consumed the chamber. Some screamed to mobilize fleets, others shouted for diplomacy. But across the galaxy, on 1,000 worlds, the same message had played, and for the first time in a century, the galaxy realized that Earth had never been silent. It had been listening, and now it was speaking again. On the Eidolon, Rhea watched the reports of chaos spreading across the Council systems, her crew waiting for orders. "They'll come for us?" Voss said. "They'll bring everything they have." Rhea nodded slowly. "Good," she said. "It's time they remembered who built the peace they betrayed." She looked at the stars, her voice low. "They thought silence meant surrender. They never learned that silence was our war cry." And as the fleet prepared for movement, the Terran engines burned bright for the first time in 100 years, lighting the nebula like dawn breaking after endless night. The Council had awakened what they tried so hard to bury, and across the stars, one phrase echoed again and again in the ancient Terran frequency. "You've made a mistake you will never forget." The message that shattered the galaxy spread faster than light, carried by every relay, every satellite, every trading ship that ever whispered through the void. It was everywhere at once, the calm voice of a human echoing through the speakers of warships, council chambers, and civilian homes. It said, nothing of threat, nothing of revenge, only a statement that froze blood and hearts alike. "You called us extinct, you called us forgotten, you called us wrong." No one slept that night, not in the core worlds, not in the colonies, not in the Council's glittering capital. The air itself seemed to hum with fear, and though the stars outside looked the same, something had changed in their light. It felt colder, sharper, watching, like the gaze of something ancient and patient that had finally opened its eyes again. On Valira Prime, chaos ruled. Every fleet recalled, every defense system on high alert, admirals screaming orders across the comms. "Find them! Track the source. I want every deep space sensor pointed at Sol." But no signal could find Earth. It was as though the homeworld had become a hole in reality, an absence of light surrounded by something vast and breathing. In the Council war room, Intelligence Chief Aren stood before the holographic map of known space, his voice tight. "We've detected movement near the dead corridor." The speaker frowned. "That region is uninhabitable." "It was," Aren said, "until now." He expanded the image, revealing a series of faint energy readings pulsing through the dust clouds of an old nebula. The readings formed a pattern, precise, rhythmic, unmistakably artificial. The speaker whispered, "A fleet!" Aren nodded. "Not one, several. Moving information, transponder codes unknown. But one signature repeats, over and over." He hesitated, then spoke the name like a curse. "Eidolon." The room went silent. The name was Myth, the last Terran flagship, lost when Earth fell. Every Council officer knew its history. The ship that had fought until the atmosphere burned and vanished into the dark without a trace. The speaker stared at the projection. "If that ship exists, then so does the rest of their fleet," Aren swallowed. "And they are not hiding anymore. Far away, deep within the heart of that same nebula." The Eidolon moved like a shadow through the mist, her hull lit by slow pulses of blue light, each one timed with the rhythm of her engines. Her crew moved without words, focused, silent. A family born not of nations but of survival, Admiral Rhea Dalton stood at the central viewport, her reflection framed by the swirling clouds outside. "Status," she said softly. Commander Voss approached. "All fleets ready. The Vanguard reports Council. Patrols approaching the Param line, waiting for your word." Rhea's gaze didn't waver. "Hold positions," she said. "Let them come closer. They've forgotten what real fear feels like. Let them remember it when they see us." She turned, her tone sharper now. "No open fire until I say. They will shoot first, and history will remember who started this." In her private quarters, Rhea sat alone for a moment, staring at a small relic on her desk. A piece of scorched metal shaped like a leaf. It was all that remained of the oak trees once planted outside the United Terran Council building on Earth. She touched it lightly, her fingers trembling. She remembered her mother's voice telling her stories of blue skies and green oceans, a world that believed in peace until it was betrayed. She whispered to the relic, "We didn't die, Mom, we became the storm they created." Her reflection stared back at her in the glass, calm, cold, but behind her eyes burned the fire of every generation that had suffered in silence. Her voice lowered, "And now, we answer." Back in the council chamber, a young officer rushed in breathless. "Contact! Outer Defense Grid reports visual confirmation of unknown vessels." The speaker rose. "How many? Hundreds?" The officer stammered. "No, thousands, forming in the nebula line, moving in coordinated patterns." The hollow display flickered, revealing a sight that drained the color from every face in the room. Black ships, vast, sleek, and silent, forming a crescent around the council's frontier sectors, each one bearing the faint white spiral glowing like a wound in the void. The speaker whispered, "Impossible." Aren shook his head. "No, sir, inevitable." As they watched, the Terran fleet began. Transmitting again, no threats, no demands, just coordinates that matched every world that had once betrayed Earth. Panic spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Civilians fled the outer colonies. Governments begged for protection. But the Council was paralyzed. Every plan, every strategy fell apart because they were fighting an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't predict, an enemy that had learned every one of their tactics a century ago because humanity had helped invent them. In one desperate move, the Council ordered a preemptive strike. Fleets gathered at the border of the nebula, armadas stretching for light years, their formation glittering like steel stars, commanders shouting into comms, "Engage on sight!" But when the Terran ships emerged, there was no sight to engage. They appeared not from hyperspace but from the dark itself, slipping through folds of light like phantoms, one by one, until the horizon was filled with them, silent, waiting, unshaken. Then the first Council ship fired. A beam of energy tore through the void, hitting a Terran cruiser dead on. For a moment, the stars went white, and then the light bent back, the beam reversed, tearing the Council's own vessel apart in a silent explosion of blue fire. Across the fleet, alarms blared. "Their weapons are reflecting our fire. How is that possible?" Another shouted. "They're disrupting our targeting systems." Within seconds, the organized Council armada dissolved into chaos, their ships spinning and colliding as Terran vessels drifted past them slowly, methodically, without a sound. Rhea watched from the bridge, her voice low. "Stand down weapons." Voss turned, shocked. "Ma'am, no retaliation," she said. "Let them destroy themselves. Fear will do more than fire ever could." And she was right. Within an hour, the Council fleet had torn itself apart in confusion and panic, the nebula filled with the debris of empires that had forgotten humility. When the last Council vessel finally stopped transmitting, Rhea gave her first order. "Transmit this message on all frequencies," she said quietly. "This is not war. This is the echo of your own crimes. We will not conquer you. We will not destroy you. We will remind you." The message reached every planet, every colony, every ship, and across the galaxy the people trembled because they understood what it meant. The humans were not coming to rule, they were coming to haunt, to dismantle everything that had been built on betrayal. In the Council war room, the speaker buried his head in his hands, his voice broken. "We thought they were gone." Lauren's old chair stood empty beside him, a symbol of what once was, and now, he whispered to no one, "How do you fight a ghost that remembers?" But no answer came, only the echo of that same Terran signal pulsing through the dark, steady and slow. "We remember. We never left." And far beyond, aboard the Eidolon, Rhea looked out at the burning wreckage drifting through the nebula. Her heart heavy but resolute, she spoke softly, as if to the ghosts of the past. "This isn't vengeance, this is balance." She turned to her crew, her voice like steel. "They wanted to forget us, but they will never forget again." And as her ship glided silently through the smoke of ruined fleets, the stars themselves seemed to dim, bowing to the return of the species that had once lit them, with fire and now returned with silence more terrifying than war. The galaxy that once mocked humanity now spoke its name in whispers. Every transmission carried tension. Every captain's eyes scanned the darkness beyond their scanners, waiting for the ghosts to appear again. Fear had replaced arrogance, and yet deep within the council there were those who refused to believe. Pride still blinded them. They told themselves the Terrans were simply a rogue faction, a trick of technology, a relic from another era, but every time they sent fleets to confirm it, nothing came back. Entire armadas swallowed by silence. Their last messages nothing but faint breathing and the sound of something moving in the dark. The speaker's nights became sleepless, his dreams haunted by the image of black ships floating like tombs around his world. He tried to convince himself that they could still negotiate, still reason, that maybe humanity could be brought to the table. But the truth settled like cold metal in his chest. They weren't dealing with diplomats anymore. They were dealing with the consequence of betrayal made flesh. On the other side of the galaxy, aboard the Eidolon, Admiral Rhea Dalton stood before the panoramic view of a dying council world. Its sky burning from orbital collisions, its lights flickering as its planetary grid failed. She had not ordered a single shot fired. The destruction below was the result of the council's own desperation. Cities overloaded with evacuations, defense systems turning inward in panic. Voss approached quietly, his voice low. "We could have ended it in one strike." Rhea didn't move, her eyes fixed on the horizon of flame. "They're ending themselves, Commander. We only showed them the truth." "And what truth is that?" he asked, his voice shaking. "That peace built on lies will always collapse," she said softly. "And that mercy can be far crueler than death." Elsewhere, Saran, the historian who had discovered the ancient Terran message, was now a prisoner, held in a dim room somewhere aboard a Terran outpost hidden in the folds of space. He had been captured not by force but by curiosity, taken alive so he could see what humanity had become. His first sight of them had broken every expectation he'd ever been taught. They were not savage, not monstrous, their faces calm, their movements precise, their eyes holding something ancient, not hatred but memory. They spoke to him as if to a child who'd been misled by cruel teachers. "You want to know what happened to Earth?" said a woman dressed in a dark uniform marked with the white spiral. "Then look around you." She led him through the metal corridors filled with Terran soldiers and scientists working in silence. No shouting, no fear, only purpose. She pointed to a vast window that looked down upon a glowing blue planet below. Saran gasped. "That's impossible." He whispered. "Earth was destroyed." The woman smiled faintly. "That's what they told you." Below them stretched the rebuilt world. Oceans restored, forests regrown, cities rebuilt under crystal domes of light. A world alive again. "We hid in the ashes," she said. "And when we rose, we didn't rise to rule. We rose to remember." Saran's knees weakened as he looked out. "But why come back now?" The woman turned to him, her gaze sharp. "Because the galaxy forgot what humanity gave it. Peace, unity, hope." She walked closer, her voice lowering. "And when they betrayed us, they didn't just destroy Earth. They destroyed trust. They destroyed the idea that we could be more than fear. So we learned to build in silence, to watch, to prepare, because one day the galaxy would need to remember what it costs to forget." She paused. "You will return to your council, Saran, and you will tell them what you saw." "They won't believe me," he said weakly. "They will," she replied. "Because when the next world falls silent, they'll know you were right." The council's paranoia grew like a disease. Worlds began to turn on each other, blaming neighboring systems for Terran interference. Alliances fractured, trade halted, and the once glorious galactic order began to rot from within. At the next council meeting, panic filled the chamber. "The Terrans must be stopped," shouted one admiral. "They won't stop until we're all gone." "Gone?" the speaker shouted back. "They've destroyed no one. Every system they touch collapses on its own." "Then that's worse," someone screamed. "They're showing us our weakness." Aren stood at the edge of the room, silent, before finally speaking. "They don't need to fight us, because they've already won." The room froze. "What are you saying?" the speaker demanded. Aren met his gaze. "They've made us turn on ourselves. They've made us remember our sins. That's what revenge looks like when it belongs to them." On the Eidolon, Rhea listened to the intercepted council transmissions. The desperation, the cries, the arguments, the fear. And though her face remained calm, inside her chest something ached. Voss looked at her quietly. "You hear it too, don't you?" She nodded slowly. It's the sound of them breaking. And does it satisfy you? He asked. Her eyes drifted to the window, the stars reflecting in her pupils like ghosts. No, she said softly. It's supposed to, but it doesn't. We were supposed to end this with justice, not sorrow. He hesitated before asking, then why keep going? Rhea closed her eyes for a moment, her voice almost a whisper. Because somewhere, someone will still teach their child that humans were monsters. And until that story changes, we can't stop. Saran returned to the council weeks later, thinner, haunted, his eyes distant. He walked into the chamber carrying the holographic recording of Earth's rebirth. And when he played it, the room fell utterly silent. The image of blue oceans and green continents shimmering across the dome ceiling like a living dream. Many wept, others denied it. It's a trick. One shouted, it's false data. Saran turned to them, his voice trembling but firm. No, it's real. They are alive, and they are watching. They could have destroyed us 100 times over, but they didn't, and that should terrify you more than anything. He looked at the speaker. They don't seek our end, they seek our reflection. The speaker's voice broke. Then what do we do? Saran's eyes filled with tears. You remember. Before they make you remember the hard way. In the following weeks, more worlds began reporting strange events. Factories shutting down without sabotage, weapons turning to dust, entire databanks rewritten overnight with a single phrase glowing on every screen. We remember. Temples on distant colonies found Terran symbols etched into their walls overnight, glowing faintly under alien moons. The people called it prophecy, others called it warning. But to those who understood, it was neither. It was memory made manifest, a galaxy being, forced to look in the mirror of its own history. And deep in the silence of space, aboard the Eidolon, Rhea stood before the memorial wall etched with names of those who had died a century ago. She traced her fingers over the carved letters, whispering, You told us to protect peace, and we did, even if peace had to be built from fire. Behind her, the fleet prepared for its next movement, engines humming low, a sound like the heartbeat of the universe itself, and for a moment, Rhea closed her eyes, hearing the echoes of Earth's last transmission in her mind. You've made a mistake you will never forget. She exhaled, her voice steady. And they never will. The weeks that followed were filled with unease. The galaxy no longer spoke of humans as myth, but as ghosts that refused to die. Every new dawn brought rumors of Terran ships appearing over distant worlds. Not attacking, not demanding, just watching from orbit until the local authorities surrendered their weapons or fled in panic. Whole planets changed allegiance overnight. Not from fear of destruction but from something deeper, the unbearable silence that followed the sight of those black ships. Hanging in the void like judgment itself, people said the Terrans didn't need to conquer. They only needed to look, and the guilty would collapse beneath their own memory. Yet even amid the fear, there were those who began to hope. Whispers spread across the colonies. The humans are back, some said with awe. They're saving the forgotten worlds. For while the Council's arrogance crumbled, the Terrans were quietly rebuilding the border systems that had been abandoned. Their ships delivering food, repairing power grids, healing worlds the Council had let starve for decades. The galaxy didn't understand. They couldn't, because to them vengeance meant fire. But to humanity, vengeance meant remembering what compassion used to feel like and using it to remind the galaxy what it had lost. Saran became the Council's unwanted truth. They couldn't silence him because he had seen too much. He was summoned to endless meetings, interrogations, and sessions where trembling politicians demanded answers. Are they preparing for war? What do they want? What are they? He always gave the same answer. They are what you made them. His voice quiet, worn, but filled with something none of them could name, pity. One evening after yet another futile debate, he stood alone on the balcony of the Council Tower, looking up at the twin moons, his thoughts drifting to the memory of that blue planet under glass, the hum of its cities, the quiet pride of its people. He could still hear the words of the Terran officer who had escorted him through their halls. We rebuilt not to prove our strength, but to prove that we still could. And he wondered if the galaxy even deserved their return. On the Eidolon, Admiral Rhea watched a new world appear on the viewport, its surface cracked and scarred, one of the oldest Council bastions. the kind of world where orders to burn Earth had once been signed. Her voice was cold but low. "Open a channel." The AI responded. "Ready?" Her image appeared across the planet's sky, projected in light visible from every city, her uniform dark, her expression unreadable. "This is Admiral Rhea Dalton of Terran Command," she said, her tone even calm, deadly in its control. 100 years ago, this world approved the cleansing of my home. You called it an act of peace. Today, we call it memory. Across the planet, leaders panicked, weapons rose, defenses came online, but she raised her hand. "Stand down. We are not here to destroy you. We are here to remind you that peace cannot be built on ashes." And then the skies above the planet filled not with fire but with light, ships descending quietly and releasing drones that began rebuilding the broken cities instead of leveling them. Rhea turned away from the screen, her words soft. "Let them choke on their shame." Commander Voss stepped beside her, his voice heavy. "You could end this faster." "And become what they made us?" she asked without looking up. "No, vengeance isn't fire, it's truth, and truth burns longer." He stared at her for a long moment, seeing the wear in her eyes, the weight of command that had turned pride into sorrow. "You still hope for peace," he said quietly. She didn't answer, but her silence was enough. Somewhere beneath the cold steel, a flicker of the old Earth remained, small, fragile but alive. Meanwhile, on Valira Prime, the speaker stared out his window at the storm clouds gathering over the council dome. His reflection pale, the once mighty symbol of galactic order now surrounded by protest, chaos, and whispers of revolt. Worlds were declaring independence faster than they could be counted, and the council's authority was dissolving. Aren entered quietly, holding a datapad. "Another world gone dark," he said. "No violence, no war, they simply left." The speaker turned, eyes hollow. "And what do the people call it this time?" "Deliverance," Aren said softly. The word hung in the air like prophecy. "They think the Terrans are liberating them, and are they wrong?" The speaker asked, his voice trembling. "You were there when we voted," Aren said. "You remember what we did. We can't call them wrong. Not anymore." Later that night, the speaker made a private transmission to an unregistered frequency, his hands shaking. "To whoever receives this, I seek an audience with Terran Command." No reply came for hours, and then, suddenly, the hologram flickered and Rhea appeared, her presence filling the room with an unbearable stillness. "You wish to speak?" she said, her tone neutral. The speaker's lips trembled. "We want peace." "You had peace," Rhea said, "and you destroyed it." He lowered his head. "We were wrong, we were afraid. We thought humanity would become too powerful." "And now?" she asked. "Now we see what power truly is." He whispered, "It isn't conquest, it's endurance." For a moment, her expression softened. "Then perhaps there's still hope for you," she said quietly. "But peace is not given, it's remembered, and you have much to remember." The connection ended, leaving the speaker alone in the dark, tears slipping silently down his face. Outside, the city lights flickered as if the stars themselves were blinking in rhythm with some distant pulse. That night, across the galaxy, the same pulse was felt everywhere. A faint vibration, like the echo of a heartbeat older than time. And on 1,000 worlds, people looked to the skies and whispered one word: Earth. On the Eidolon, Rhea stood in the command dome, her hands clasped behind her back, watching as her fleet stretched across the void like an endless storm held in check. "Report," she said softly. "Reconstruction efforts complete on 6 systems." The AI answered, "Council resistance collapsing." She nodded, her gaze distant. "And humanity? Still waiting for your order?" The AI replied, "To stand down or to finish the echo?" Rhea exhaled slowly, her voice low and steady. "Not yet," she whispered. "Not until they understand." She turned away from the stars and walked toward the memorial wall, every step echoing softly. She placed her hand over the names, over the word Earth, and for the first time in years, a single tear slipped down her cheek. "We never wanted revenge," she murmured. "We just wanted to be remembered, right?" And, somewhere, across the galaxy, the faint hum of the Terran signal pulsed once more, slower now, calmer, like the breath of a storm finally beginning to rest, but still strong enough to remind the stars that humanity, once betrayed, had never truly fallen asleep. The galaxy had grown quieter, but not with peace. It was the quiet that comes after a scream, the kind that lingers in every corridor of power, every home, every restless night, as if the stars themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something they knew they could not stop. Across the core worlds, people whispered stories now spoken with reverence, not fear, of ships that descended not to conquer but to rebuild, of Terran soldiers who fought only to protect, who left worlds better than they found them, and in that silence, something strange began to happen. The people started to love what they once feared, and the governments began to hate what they could no longer control. The council fractured further. Every faction pulling in different directions, some demanded war, others begged for surrender, and at the center of it all, Saran's words were spreading like wildfire. His book The Forgotten Dawn, now banned in half the systems, yet still copied, read, and whispered in every shadowed corner of the galaxy. It spoke of humanity not as a threat, but as a mirror. They show us not who they are, he wrote, but who we have become. On the Eidolon, the stars burned pale against the black. Admiral Rhea Dalton stood before the command display. The outlines of hundreds of Terran ships floating in formation, silent, steady, watching over a galaxy that still trembled at the sound of their name. Commander Voss approached quietly. The council's falling apart, ma'am. 6 more member worlds just declared independence. She didn't answer at first, her gaze locked on the central feed showing Valira Prime, the once glorious capital. Now dim. They're devouring themselves? She said softly. We don't need to destroy them. We just need to let them remember what they built on our bones. You sound tired, Voss said gently. I am, she replied. Because this was never supposed to be war. It was supposed to be a lesson, but maybe they're incapable of learning. She turned away from the screen, walking slowly toward the viewport where the stars stretched endlessly ahead. Maybe that's what makes us different. We remember our pain. They bury theirs. In the old council chambers, Saran stood before the few remaining delegates, his face thin, his eyes hollow from too many sleepless nights. You called me here to speak truth, so listen, he said, his voice trembling but clear. You cannot kill an idea by destroying its people, and humanity has become an idea. It lives in your fear, in your guilt, in every silence that follows a lie. The speaker rose weakly, his voice weary. You talk as if they are gods. No, Saran said. They are the opposite. They are what happens when gods fail. The room fell silent, and in that silence they all heard it. A faint signal humming through the walls, low and steady. Every communication console flickered, and across every device appeared the same symbol, the white spiral of soul turning slowly. Beneath it, a message appeared in simple text, stand down. Remember who you were. Panic erupted. They've breached our systems again, an officer shouted. It's in every network. But the speaker simply lowered his head. No, he whispered. It's not an attack, it's a mercy. Far from the council's chaos, Rhea walked the lower decks of the Eidolon, moving past engineers and soldiers who saluted silently as she passed. She stopped at the observation bay where the holographic memorial of Earth's fallen shimmered faintly. Thousands of names suspended in light. She reached out, her fingers tracing through them like touching ghosts. We've done what we came to do, she said quietly. The council is broken, the galaxy remembers our name, but at what cost? Behind her, the eye's voice answered gently. The cost of peace is always memory, Admiral. She smiled faintly. No, the cost of peace is innocence, and we lost that long before this began. She closed her eyes, hearing again the final message of her father, the last director of Old Earth. If they betray us, don't destroy them, show them who they made us become. She opened her eyes again, whispering, I did, Father, but now, what do we become next? In the ruins of Valira Prime, people gathered under the broken dome of the council hall, staring at the holographic broadcast projected in the sky. It was not a threat, not a demand, but a voice calm, human, and impossibly sad. A century ago, you chose fear over trust, you called us dangerous, you called us extinct, and now you live with the echo of that choice. Rhea's voice filled every city, every street, every heart. We did not return for revenge, we returned so that the next time you choose peace, you understand what it means. She paused, her tone softening. We are leaving, for now, but know this. Every cry for justice, every act of cruelty, every broken promise will reach us, and when it does, we will answer as we always have. The broadcast ended, leaving the world in silence. And then, from the shadows, people began to kneel, not in fear, but in gratitude. The Eidolon prepared for departure, engines rumbling low like distant thunder. Commander Voss watched Rhea from across the bridge. Do you think they'll remember? He asked. She looked at him, her voice distant. No one remembers forever, but maybe this time they'll try longer than the last. And us? He said. What do we do when the galaxy stops needing reminders? Rhea smiled faintly. Then we sleep again, until the stars cry out, because that's what we are now. Not conquerors, not saviors, but keepers of consequence. The stars outside the viewport stretched as the fleet entered hyperspace, their light bending like ripples in water. Set course for Sol, she said. It's time to go home. As the fleet vanished into the void, the last transmission from Earth echoed across the galaxy one final time. Ancient yet alive, steady as a heartbeat in the dark. You've made a mistake you will never forget. But this time, the words carried no anger, no vengeance, only the weight of understanding. A whisper from a world that refused to die, reminding the galaxy that mercy could be the sharpest blade of all. And long after the ships disappeared from sight, the spiral of Sol remained burned in the night sky, a promise and a warning both, glowing softly where the stars refused to forget. The stars had not known silence like this in centuries, a silence that felt sacred, not empty, the kind that comes when something too vast to understand finally passes, leaving only the echo of its presence. Across the galaxy the name Earth no longer carried fear. It carried reverence. On 1,000 world statues began to rise, not by order but by memory, built by hands that once trembled at the sound of Terran fleets, now lifted in gratitude. They built them not to worship but to remember. A soldier's helmet carved from stone, a child holding a star in her palm, a spiral of white that glowed faintly under. Alien suns, the spiral of Sol, the mark that had become both symbol and promise, the promise that someone was still watching, that the stars were not alone. On Valira Prime, the ruins of the old council chamber had been turned into a garden, vines and flowers climbing through broken marble pillars, and at its center stood a plaque carved in old Terran script. Peace is not given. It is remembered. Saran stood there now, older, slower, the lines of his face carved deep with years of guilt and understanding. Beside him stood children from 6 species, listening as he spoke softly. You asked what they were, he said, his voice trembling with emotion. They were not gods, they were not monsters, they were us. What we could be if we remembered what it meant to care more than we feared. The children listened quietly, their eyes wide. But why did they leave? One small voice asked. Saran smiled faintly. Because we no longer needed them, at least not yet. Far beyond those stars, beyond the reach of sensors or time, the Terran fleet drifted in a silent orbit around the blue world they had rebuilt. The Eidolon hung in low light, her surface dark, her engines quiet, a sleeping titan resting beneath the gentle glow of Sol. Admiral Rhea Dalton stood alone on the bridge, the hum of the ship like a heartbeat under her boots. Her reflection in the viewport ghosted against the earth below. She looked tired, not with age but with the kind of weariness that comes from carrying too many ghosts for too long. Status? She murmured. The AI's voice answered softly. All fleets secure. All systems in stasis, the galaxy stable. She nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the world below. Stable? She whispered. That's what they said the last time. For a moment she closed her eyes, seeing flashes of the past. The fire, the betrayal, the screams, the silence, and then the rebuilding, the choice to fight not with fire but with restraint. Her lips curved into the faintest of smiles. Maybe this time they'll remember longer than we did. The AI paused before replying. And if they don't? She opened her eyes again, and for a moment, the light from the planet reflected in them like 2 burning suns. Then we'll remind them, she said quietly. We always do. In the command hall below, Voss stood beside the memorial wall where the names of every fallen Terran shimmered in faint gold light. He traced one name with his fingers, Elias Hale, the man whose final words had echoed through a century of stars. He whispered softly, "You were right, sir, they never forgot." The door opened behind him and Rhea entered, walking slowly, quietly. She looked at the wall for a long time before speaking. "Every time I come here, I think of what we lost to build this. Peace?" Voss looked at her. "Do you regret it?" She shook her head slowly. "No, but I regret that it took fire to teach them what peace meant." Her voice lowered to a whisper. "We gave them fear once, then hope. Now all that's left is memory, and memory fades." Voss hesitated. "Then maybe it's time we write it down." Rhea turned to him, puzzled. He continued, "We've built fleets and rebuilt worlds, but maybe the galaxy needs more than warnings and silence. Maybe it needs stories." Rhea looked at the wall again, the countless names glowing like stars, and she smiled faintly. "Then let them start here," she said softly. "Write about who we were, and who we chose to become." Years passed. The Terrans slept again. Their fleets hidden in the black between stars. Their cities deep beneath the oceans of Earth silent, waiting, and yet even in their silence, their presence lived in every corner of the galaxy. In the songs of miners who hummed Terran lullabies they never learned. In the prayers of frontier settlers who whispered to the stars before sleeping, "If you hear us, remember us." And in the archives of Valira where Saran's recordings still played long after his death, his voice sang, "They did not disappear. They became the stars themselves." And one night, on a distant world near the edge of known space, a distress beacon blinked faintly. A colony forgotten by the Council under attack by raiders. No one responded for days until the sky split open with light. A single black ship descending in silence, its hull bearing the faint white spiral that glowed like a memory. The colonists ran outside, falling to their knees as the raiders fled without a fight. No weapons fired, no sound but the deep hum of Terran engines passing above. And, when the people looked up again, the ship was gone, leaving only a single message burned into the sky in pale blue letters. "You are not alone." Back on Earth, under the calm waves of the Pacific, the command dome pulsed once with light, awakening for only a moment, its sensors receiving the message, its AI whispering softly into the quiet halls, "Signal acknowledged." And then falling silent again. Above the surface the dawn began to rise, sunlight breaking across the ocean like molten gold, touching the cities built from glass and steel, where children played unaware that their world was once ash, unaware that their peace was a legacy. Born from betrayal high above, in the faint shimmer of the morning sky, the spiral of soul appeared once more, only for a second, like a reminder from the stars themselves that humanity never truly left. They had simply learned when to return. And so the galaxy lived on, carrying within it a story written not in blood but in echoes. A story of a species that refused to vanish, of voices that turned vengeance into justice, and silence into truth. And though the stars would one day forget again, as they always did, somewhere, deep in the black, a human fleet would still be listening, waiting for that first cry of pain, that first plea for help, and when it came they would answer, not with words, not with fire, but with the quiet strength of memory itself, because humanity's revenge had never been destruction. It had always been endurance. It had always been the promise that no matter how many times the galaxy forgot, Earth would always remember.